Hey woodworkers, continuing on the conversation about door making. You see I have all the joinery fit and all of my indication marks about these partial triangle pieces all line up, so I know that orientation is how I originally planned for it. So the next step after I have the frame built is to start measuring out the exact dimensions of what the panel needs to be. So there's a couple ways of doing this, and I feel like a lot of times people, oops, I don't want to show you that end. This is a better end to look at. A lot of people get caught up in looking at the end of this little haunch here, and you can measure from haunch to haunch, and that's totally acceptable, and that will give you a specific dimension for the overall width of the panel. Unfortunately, this doesn't do anything for you as far as measuring the length of the panel, because we don't have that same information on the edges of the door. So what I have done instead was, or I've become comfortable with, is using a square. And if it's an adjustable square, this really is ideal. I could set this inside of the groove. I can lock in the exact dimension of the interior of this panel, and if this is not doing a good job of kind of staying in place, then sometimes having a clamp here would be helpful. Alright, so I've measured off here and here close to the bottom. I really don't care about what the dimension is in the center of this style. I really just want to get it as close to the joint as possible. That way it gives you the most accurate information. If this door has developed any type of problem, like a bow or anything, it's going to be least noticeable here. So measuring these things off, and I'll do the same bottom and top as well. So you see I've already marked these things out. The next step here is just going to be to measure across this dimension, but if you are going to use a tape measure, nothing wrong with that. Just be careful not to use the end of the tape here. This hook there's too many variables with this. Always measure right on the 1 inch mark, and then just remember when you transfer that to your actual panel that you subtract that first inch. Some people talk about measuring from the 10. In a similar concept, they avoid getting that hook in the way of the tape measure, and then when they read this here, 17 and 7/16, we as woodworkers, we kind of have a better concept as far as what the dimension means. So we just subtract 10 from that, and that brings us to 7 and 7/16, whatever works. Now I have a extension for my combination square, my 12 inch. This is just a 24 inch blade, and sometimes people prefer this as a measuring tool, but this helps for greater dimensions. Obviously I wouldn't really need this except for where the length is greater. So okay, so now that I've got that, I've taken those dimensions. Now I, off camera, have cut these to those dimensions. I just want to show you how I got to that place. So the next step on the door is not so much the frame, because the frame is done, but I need to create a rabbet around the panel. So let me clear out some of this stuff. So in doing this, I've already set up my table saw with a Dado stack to help me get to this place of being able to cut. So just kind of generally understanding which face I want to be facing out, which one facing in. Okay, so this one is going to be my front, this will be the inside or the back, whatever you're comfortable with. Alright, so I know that I need to be looking at these marks when I'm cutting the rabbet if I want to have a raised panel. If I just want to clean up some material here to make a rabbet all the way around the perimeter, then you want the the outside facing up. And these, I can't answer for you, this is very much subjective choice as far as what we do. So, I think this is how I'm going to want to do this. I will need part of my door frame to be able to gauge the thickness of our rabbet that we're creating. The next thing that I need to do is, I've got more chippers in this Dado set than I really need. This is wider than the rabbet that I need to make, which was done by design. What I'm going to do is set in a sacrificial fence here, and with this fence, sorry, I should have grabbed clamps before I was ready to film. Sorry, I'll do a better job of being prepared next time. That's actually a lie. I don't know if I will. I can't promise that. Alright, so with the sacrificial fence, this does a couple things. It allows us to avoid cutting into our table saw fence, which is never a good idea. And it's so tempting to just bump the fence over and just have this outside cutter, not necessarily cutting against the fence, but anytime, let's say this is not the sacrificial fence, but the actual fence, if I were to line this thing up and try to minimize the gap here, let me see if I can pull into this a little bit. No, you won't be able to see that. The temptation is just to bump the fence over so that these things don't touch. And more times than not, what I have found is that the blade is always going to make contact with that fence. And if you have a gap there, as you're cutting this board, you need to pull it away from the fence in order to get that last little tiny sliver on the outside edge. So just be aware of those options and what it is you're actually wanting to do. Okay, so for this, I'm going to lower the blade and bring this over until I have the dimension that I'm really wanting. So oops, get out of there. So I need about 7/16 plus, that looks about, I think that's where I want it. Okay. So I'm going to measure this now, just as a double check. Pull this fence away to make sure that when I turn on the saw and I raise up this blade, I'm not actually cutting into my fence. So I've got plenty of gap here, margin, so this will work just fine. Please take the time to double check these things. It's so easy to do and so dangerous if you forget to do it. Just in case you do run into the situation where you cut into your table saw fence, they're replaceable, so it's really not the end of the world. It's just an added expense and annoyance that we all probably could avoid or want to avoid. Okay. So let me set up this cut. Alright, eye protection's on. I'm going to turn the saw on and then raise up the blade slowly. So what I'm trying to do is establish the thickness for fitting into this groove here of the frame of the door. So because of the way this one is set up, I've got just a slight raised panel situation here, and that's kind of what I wanted to show and talk about. So, so this is going to be the inside of the door. All of the raised panel parts are going to be facing down. With a raised panel, it kind of makes sense to do it this way. I could have easily milled this panel thinner, but I get more stability, more less of a chance of this thing cupping or twisting the thicker it is. If I would mill this all the way down to 1/4 inch, even if I would sticker this, it seems to present challenges if it's solid wood. If it's a man-made material, then you'll probably be just fine. But just considering what we're getting into with this, we want to be cautious. All right, so lining that one up, that looks good. And I'm going to draw in, so I'm trying to do this so you can see. This is going to be about the thickness I need to remove. So this side here is the waist, this part is the part that I want to keep. That's still the outside face. I'm doing a raised panel. Oops, I reversed that. No, that's right, that's right. That's right. Okay, so I'm keeping that. This will all go away. So, now that I've made that mark here, actually I want to make one more mark to kind of carry that line over. Alright, so I've got some decent marks here to show the height of my blade. So I'm squatting down and I'm just going to try to gauge what's happening with this cut. Now it's pretty close. Alright, I want to make sure that this blade is still free spinning. I never want to have that blade elevated and making contact with this fence and then turn it on. That just puts too much force onto the whole mechanism. So, alright. So, a lot of times, let me rephrase it. Whenever I'm cutting a panel here, I always want to cut across the grain first. So, I'll do this, flip it around, do this after I do a test fitting to make sure that I have the set on right. And then after the ends are cut, then I'll do the edges. Now, the edges, I have no problem with running this thing through because the longest section of the board is going to be supported against the fence. Where it gets interesting here is cutting the end grain, because now this is the shorter dimension. There's really nothing back here in this application to run this through the saw. And so what I want to do is introduce a miter gauge for this application, because there's so much force coming with the saw blade that I just don't want this to come away from the cut, and so it's an easy thing to avoid. So bear with me 1 second. I'll do this. I'm sure there are some folks watching that have a background in physics, and they will tell me that maybe it doesn't matter when it is this proportion to another, or this percentage to this percentage. I would love to hear any of that information. I just think that getting into good habits never puts you in harm's way, and so I'm doing it this way. Okay, so I'll make these cuts here. The thing I'm watching for is that I've got good alignment of our panel to the fence. If this fence were, or pardon me, if this miter gauge were off, and when I bring it up to the fence I see a gap, it's going to translate into the cut and it's going to look like a mess. So this, if it's been cut squarely, is going to dictate where the miter gauge needs to be set. So I'm good with this. This one looks pretty happy. I'm happy with this. Instead of cutting the full width of the dado blade, what I'm going to do, because I'm just testing the height of the blade first, I'm going to bring this away from the fence, which is something I could never do if I didn't have a miter gauge. But I just want to run this across the board, the blade, to gauge how I'm doing as far as the height. And then once I'm happy with that, then I can go over and do the whole thing. If I'm too high with the blade, I just don't want that thin material being the only contact on this part of the frame. So that's what I'm doing here. Alright, so here we go, putting interior protection. I'm not going to raise up the blade, but I think I'm going to have to after I do this cut. Awfully close. last test fit in there. Yeah, that's pretty good. Okay. So with that, alright, so that's one rabbit. This next one I don't need to test and cut, so I'm just going to go the full. I should probably walk you through what I'm looking for. Okay, so first and foremost, I'm looking to engage in the thickness of this rabbet here. So the fit, this is a pretty good fit. It's not going anywhere. But my question now is it too thick? And I think it might be. It felt really nice on the corner. I'm going to stop talking. You can kind of hear that I'm getting good capture here, and it's kind of like a piston fit situation, which is always good. What I really don't want to do, well, it's got to be just right. If I have that rabbet too thick, as I jam this into the groove, then it's going to split those, or that groove apart, which doesn't work. If it's too thin, I really hate the idea of having this panel rattle around when it's in use. So I'm trying to find that perfect balance of where it is I need to be. The thing that I'm checking for now is I want to make sure that I've set up my fence in the right position. Oops, that's too tight. Oops. Alright, so I've got a good gap here, and I'm bottoming out on the inside of the groove. Yeah, okay, hopefully that's helpful. So that's kind of what it is I'm looking for. So good. So I like what this is happening. I just need to change the height of the blade and do one more round. Once I've got the ends dialed in, oops, then the edges will come together pretty nicely. Alright, so getting rid of view, refocusing camera. Okay. So again, I can't really do any modifications to the blade height without the blade spinning. So turning it on, raising it up just a touch. That might have been too much. Kind of failed to mention the whole purpose of what I was doing here. There we go. So, you might not be able to see this. You definitely can't see it now. Ah, lovely. Alright. So this is the entire point of why we do the cross grain first, is because I know I'm going to get tear out. So if I get tear out on the edges that have not yet been cut, then I know that when I make this cut, that tear out goes away. So this part, sorry, I'm going to stay in frame.